Enterprise SEO isn't just bigger, it's more complex. You're not just managing more pages, but you're managing platforms, tech stacks, global teams, and politics that come with it. When visibility drops, the stakes are even higher. At the enterprise level, you're faced with the added layer of technical complexity in scaling your efforts, as well as the additional challenge of stakeholder management. This is the Voice of Search podcast. My name's Tyson, and joining us today is Petra Kis-Herczegh, a freelance consultant and educator who just released a free enterprise SEO course with Sitebulb. So be sure to check that out in the show notes. And today, Petra is going to be sharing with us how to overcome enterprise SEO challenges with practical AI and non-AI solutions. So Petra, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, I perked up when I saw like some of the topics and things that you wanted to talk about here, because I feel like you're combining two areas that I like within SEO. One, the enterprise level, because just stakes are higher, complexity is greater, and it's kind of, in my mind, like, you know, the larger arena to perform in SEO. But then also education. And I think that's particularly interesting because you have a ton of information out there around like the SEO 101 basics, tactics, intros. But I feel like there's a huge gap in that, just kind of learning the ropes of performing SEO at an enterprise level. So maybe like, what was your motivation in creating this course?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a really good summary, that this specific information is probably missing, and a lot of it is the very hands-on, like how to do SEO. But when it comes to SEO, enterprise SEO, we know that it isn't just doing more of the same thing. It's a totally different game. And I think there is not that much of that content out there, potentially because a lot of the educational content comes from people who operate as consultants or agencies in the industry, and they are really trying to put all that information out there in terms of like how to do SEO day to day. But then enterprise SEOs probably get a little bit caught up in, dealing with those internal politics, and it can be more difficult to actually focus on content creation. And kind of, I prove my own point by being an enterprise SEO at the start of my career, which I was very lucky to start that way, to work in-house. And then later I moved into consultancy and working for enterprise software companies, where I worked with a huge number of enterprise clients. And that's when I realized how much of what I experienced to start with is not the standard experience of an SEO. So it's always been kind of my motivation to try to do more of that education at a wider level. So that's how the course was born.
Well, and maybe if you could elaborate too, like for someone that hasn't worked at the kind of in the enterprise level, like what are some of the additional challenges that someone can expect from both like execution of SEO from a tactical level, as well as just the operational element?
Yeah, I think it's just a totally different game. And I do this in the course as well. And I love giving analogies and stories, right? So imagine that you're cooking in your own kitchen, you're having some friends over, and you've done it a million times. It's like a familiar space. In order to prepare for that, you write a quick shopping list. But like, if you run out of things, then, it's not the end of the world. Like, you can maybe even ask your friends to bring a few things. Like, you can manage that. It's not high stress. But if you're like running a kitchen at like a 5-star Michelin restaurant, and there is a huge event or like a wedding or an award ceremony, like, it doesn't matter how many times you cooked in your own kitchen. You can be very experienced in that, but it's a totally different game. And you have to delegate things, you have to manage budgets, you have to manage people, you don't know anything about their requirements. And this really well shows like scale as well, because I don't know, if you're preparing for like a restaurant that's really busy and lots of people come in, that's one thing. But I think enterprise is also that you could be cooking in your own kitchen, but a celebrity could be coming over because a friend of you is bringing over someone really important. That changes the whole stakes of the event. And that's again like kind of going into that enterprise territory, like some of these elements that are just making that usual process or that well prepared checklist and all of that into something where you have to use the words, it depends. You have to use the words, like, I don't know, I can't just replicate this same thing because the context is different, and you have to actually create systems and processes instead of trying to just follow the same sort of steps that you've done before.
And like, what are some of those added layers from like scaling efforts? Like, I think one, I love the kitchen analogy because it's like you run out of fish and you're at home, you can just run to the store and pick up one, but you're not picking up thousands of fish just like kind of on a whim. So like, what are some of those, I guess, illustrations of the activities when it comes to enterprise that would kind of highlight that? Like, I mean, content would be an easy, kind of like obvious one where you're talking just easy to write 3 articles. It's difficult to write 3,000. But like, what other things could someone expect?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the planning ahead. And yes, content feels like a sort of easy analogy with like, writing a few blog posts versus managing, I don't know, like thousands of product pages and the copy on them, as well as like an enterprise blog that the company has, and all the other content that they put out there on socials and things like that. So you have to plan ahead and connect the dots, and a lot of that will mean that when you start, if you have to deal with the immediate challenges, you have to balance your time between that and the planning ahead part, and trying to prioritize and push for getting things actually executed and implemented. So it becomes this I guess, really cool like balancing game of like trying to navigate like the firefighting, if that's what you need to deal with, being involved in other people's projects, as well as kind of looking at your own strategy and trying to plan ahead, and trying to understand how the business works. Like, how do they develop the site? How often do they release new code? If you're working with a small site, then it's even likely that you have access to your CMS and maybe you can change a few things, or you're working with like a developer or two and you can kind of discuss things with them and implement changes. That's definitely very different if you're working at enterprise level and you really need to understand the ways they work and how you can actually get your tickets in and get them prioritized. So things can take a lot longer. Plus you need to understand like how you can, let's say they are working on a project like some sort of migration already, so then how you can come in and support that, and not just help those projects to actually execute well, but maybe push in some of your own tickets and priorities that, if you're changing that template, can we also add schema, can we also do this, like just some of those little things that prioritization doesn't happen in a silo. It doesn't happen in you evaluating which one of these SEO items would bring the most value, because whatever can get executed will bring the most value. Like, it doesn't matter if something would bring a lot of value if it's like impossible to execute because of an old CMS or because of certain limitations and blockers. You have to let that go for the time being anyway. So those are, I would say, the things that make it so challenging and complex to try to navigate.
Yeah, and the first piece of that, I feel like you're kind of hitting on a little bit of like the skill set or personality of someone that's going to be successful in the enterprise arena, because you're adding an additional dimension or complexity to the planning process, where someone that's working on a smaller website, majority of the strategy is just which items are you taking when, and when are you actually doing them yourself. Whereas true, it's like now with enterprise, you're having to fight for budgets, work off existing roadmaps, like all those other elements. So I think you do have to think broader, or in a more like a longer vision, because you have to be thinking of when you can get things slotted in addition to what needs to actually be done. But I think that that type of strategizing and working with given constraints becomes so much more prevalent. And a lot of times those constraints aren't necessarily like what volume you can produce from content, but it's more of like, which teams are you getting buy-in? Are you getting budget? Are you getting, the means to execute on? You hit on a point too, though, that I feel like really makes the difference between a good and great enterprise SEO is that piece of what you can execute on. Because I think like most SEOs, once they land that gig at the enterprise level, like they're probably pretty solid on identifying what needs to be done. But I think in my experience, the gap oftentimes exists in like the execution front. So like, what advice would you have for someone that's making that jump to then, be successful at this level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is where the people skills element really come in, because you just have to listen first, and you just have to understand the state of the business. You have to understand the politics, who are those teams who are driving change, who are kind of making those decisions. And it's it's just one of those situations where, to give an example, like you could be working for enterprise e-commerce. So my examples, I worked a lot with enterprise e-commerce clients. You could be working for a luxury fashion brand where it doesn't matter how big their website is. It's always going to be the brand team who kind of gives that final sign off. Like if the brand team, or let's say it this way, if the brand team is unhappy, it's just not going to happen. Like, I had situations where it was insanely difficult to prove that we can't have a self-playing video on the homepage because it's just terrible for user experience, for page speed, for like we just don't want that. And the brand team just kept on explaining how that's really shows the essence of the brand, and it's very important for storytelling and all of that, and none of the other sort of reasons worked. And you really had to go in with like the user experience from a customer point of view, like explaining how, okay, but if I'm a customer and I'm expecting a luxury experience from this luxury brand, then look at my experience. Does this feel luxurious to you? Like kind of that way that you are speaking that team's language. Whereas you could go into still an enterprise e-commerce brand that and it could still be fashion, but or any other sort of retail or any other brand where it's product who's driving everything, because they really focus on the fact that their online business is driving the most sales, and actually everything is focused around their agile development, and they're organized into their scrum teams, and like with it doesn't matter what you want to get done, you have to put in your tickets, you have to get prioritization approved, and then you have to build totally different relationships. They probably still have a brand team, but they probably focus on more like things like their tone of voice and the content and all of those things, but they more just probably have guidelines for the website rather than making those decisions. So I think you really have to go in, listen, and understand who's making the decisions or who's blocking the decisions when it comes to the website. And that's a very crucial element of your people skills. And to do that first, and until you do that, don't even start planning of what's wrong. I mean, you can have your little list of like, why do we have, page templates that are like just 100 years old at this stage, like, and are totally not user friendly. Like I see huge company sites where they still have non-mobile friendly pages. Like, how is that at this stage? I don't know how is that possible, but actually it happens. And yes, of course, as an SEO, you would go in and you would say like, we need to change this, but it might be a very difficult challenge. You have to do that listening piece first and see where you can actually support rather than trying to drive, basically.
And it's a perfect call out as well. It's like your SEO plan or strategy is just the table stakes in this, because that's not going to determine or be what's going to make you successful at the end of the day. But I love that you called out the piece of like, almost in a lot of ways like letting go of the SEO perspective. And that's an area that I feel like some SEOs really struggle with. And I don't know if it comes from like, SEOs historically have struggled to get like the recognition and the spotlight within the organization. So it's like we're almost constantly wanting to justify why SEO and search is so great. But it's like you oftentimes lose the audience, whether you're talking to a CEO or CMO, when you drop into that like jargon conversation. And maybe like, I guess, dogpile on your example. Another great one for e-commerce is page speed. It's like you don't have to pitch page speed at an e-commerce company as an SEO initiative. Pitch it as a conversion play, and you can almost seed it with someone else and they'll fight your battle for you to get like that initiative picked up, rather than trying to convince someone while a page speed will help your rankings. It's like that's a much weaker argument than, hey, we can improve conversion rate, which is going to achieve the same end result of getting resources allocated to picking up the thing that I wanted. So I love that you called out like that example or illustration of you're also thinking like 3 moves ahead rather than just one move or one interaction or one kind of initiative in play.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like just to quickly add to that as well, I think the other, because page speed is such a good example, but the other thing as well on the content side is EEAT, which people like to reference that and how important that is for Google, but actually EEAT, like almost every brand will have like tone of voice guidelines and how they want to be perceived, and a lot of that will already resonate with EEAT. So why wouldn't you just use the internal you know what you're talking about, you know that you're talking about the EEAT, but you just use that tone of voice documentation and put it, like just layer it on all your recommendations, that this is why we need to do it this way because that's our tone of voice and that's how we want to appear. And it will just make a lot more sense than to try to educate senior decision makers in particular on what EEAT is.
Which is, yeah, like no one cares also what EAT is as far as like a naming convention goes. But yeah, like what is within that is important to the business, but they don't like there's no value for us to be like, great, they understand and remember EAT. So with this, I feel like we've made the argument where we accept that we're working in a more complex, more challenging arena. We know that our just SEO tasks are the starting point, but we're reliant on how we strategize and plan within the organization. We're dropping out things like jargon in our vocabulary. What else? What else do you encourage SEOs kind of lean into from whether it's a personal development or approach perspective piece to enterprise?
So one thing that just suddenly came to mind as you asked that was kind of the less is more principle, especially
Mm.
at enterprise, and I would say especially if you're working for a large site. So I think as SEOs, we are guilty of thinking that we have to put more content out there. I mean, obviously, like evergreen is growing, but I think there are still trends around, like the programmatic SEO and like just creating very specific localized content for all sorts of audiences. But more doesn't always create more traffic, more opportunity, more conversions when it comes to enterprise where you're managing things like crawl budgets and
Mm.
it's also very difficult to scale. So I think that less is more, and also like having a huge list of SEO tasks that you want to get done. Again, less is more. If you are trying to push 20 tickets and none of them get done, or like two of those get done, versus if you would be really focused on like 3 core initiatives that you can get done within different teams, then your energy would be going towards things that are actually getting executed. So maybe that less is more, or the fact that if you prioritize everything, if everything is important, then nothing is important. So
Mm.
you just need to really carefully select those things where you spend your energy on in terms of pushing internally.
Yeah, you're being more selective in when and where you're applying the focus and energy because you can't be everywhere in the organization. And if you're trying to be that person that has all those meetings, oftentimes you're going to be, chasing more than, to your point, like implementing. I oftentimes like describing it to people too is it's as if you're playing cards and you only have so many cards in your hand, and so you have to be strategic of when you're playing them, because if you play something at the wrong time, it sometimes is very difficult to go back on that. Like if you played that page speed at the wrong planning point in the year, then you lost the interest of the CTO or whoever it was. Revisiting it, it's going to be a tough kind of go. And so it's like that timing element, I feel like, is also very critical.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And they need to be results that then you can where people really committed, so it gets implemented in a way that, people have taken accountability for it. It's not just like, there we go, we've done it, but actually there are like, we've implemented hreflang, but actually there are like tons of errors in there, let's say. Then they are saying like, oh, we've done it, but they've clearly not committed to, they haven't understood why this is so important, so you can't hold them accountable
Mm,
because they are not taking ownership of that. They say like, we've just done what you asked, but let's say you didn't prepare for it correctly, and you didn't provide the right guidance, you didn't test it, you didn't approve it, there wasn't that process around it, so now it's live, it's broken, it's actually not just not driving results, but maybe even causing more issues. So senior leadership is looking at it as, oh, but they've implemented it, it's not working, why would we listen to you? So I think be very, very careful with the planning around how you're getting things done and how you're getting to a yes when you're actually getting something implemented. Like, don't get excited
mm.
about like, yay, they finally put it in the sprint. Like, okay, but is it gonna go live in a way that you need it to go live? Because that's also very important.
Yeah, it's like you have to, don't celebrate before the end of the race. Like you still need to get something live on the site in the way that it fits that criteria. Um, which is, I feel like it kind of leads us a little bit into like some of the even broader like organizational elements. Now I feel like, and it's kind of an interesting overlap because you're coming off just releasing this free SEO course, and I feel like education within enterprise SEO, like to me, it almost has its own place as being a standalone initiative, because like, and it's not necessarily like teaching SEO basics, but depending who the audience is, I feel like we have this ongoing like underlining initiative to help people understand and bridge and make it really like search more approachable in that sense. So it's like you are in a lot of cases a teacher or an educator within the organization, and you're creating that culture that is either going to support or make SEO like more difficult. Have you found, or is there anything that you'd recommend to SEOs that are either trying to influence that culture around how search is viewed, or even just like the general basic fundamentals of search?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I've personally always been someone who was very big on education, even like to internal teams as well, everywhere I worked. So, like, whether you're doing some knowledge sharing sessions, lunch and learns, or monthly updates on what's changing in search, that can be really interesting. And I think those are all great ideas. So it's one thing to keep in mind if you want to do that. That's great. The other question is, are you just asking people for some additional time to commit to learning? Like, you have to give to get as well. And I
Mm,
think if you're gonna do these things, then what are you doing in return in terms of learning about how they work? Like, lunch and learns and these weekly or monthly sessions or something, collaborative sessions with UX teams or with devs or with content teams and social teams can be great if that's part of a wider agenda where they also share and they also teach you something and you're also learning something. And, that's really a win-win situation. But you don't want to be known as the person who's just kind of coming in and trying to educate everyone about why everything about search and that's great and everyone should know it. Like, there has to be something that other people feel like it's worth it for them, and it's kind of that mutual relationship where they learn something about what you do and what's important to you, because you are also learning about something on what's important to them. So the mutual goal is really to work better together rather than for them to understand search. Like, of course, we're likely biased. Like, I also think, understanding how search works should be part of general education because we all use Google, but then that's not the case. So we can't we can't change that going into an enterprise business with that mindset. We have to focus on that mutual goal of this is really for us to work better together. And you could potentially do that by showing actual examples to, let's say, the brand team, like how branded searches help certain things. Like, they might not have this data and they might be struggling to show how their branded campaigns affect different things, but you could show how it impacts trends, searches, product pages as well, and the volumes around there when they launch a campaign. And that would be something you give to them and would help them. So of course then they say, well, we want to learn about this because it's helping us, and you're telling us that you can actually help us measure this. Great. So that's an example how you could bring it in a way that it's really, again, something that you're already giving to them rather than just saying, come sit here for an hour and watch me talk about SEO.
Which is such, I think, like, key advice. Like, a couple of things that jumped out for me is, like, one, being humble in the approach. So it's like you're not going in thinking, hey, we're special, we're different, we're more important than any other person in the organization or team. So there's, like, I feel like a humbleness to the approach that you're advocating for, but then also a, like, respect to it, because it's like, yeah, just like an enterprise SEO is probably in meetings for 6 hours a day and barely has time to do those actual activities. The same thing's true for everyone else, that then you're wanting to give overtime. And it's almost like, how would you feel if the paid search team wanted to teach you about campaign structure and keyword bidding strategies? It's like, we're going to kind of push it away in the same way that I think a lot of people kind of disregard search, but it's a very human element. It's like we do that all the time with other stuff. So why would we be any different than that? So yeah. I love that call out. What else I would like to kind of come back to, because I feel like we're not going to obviously be able to cover everything within the course, but maybe if you could kind of just provide for us, like, how did you structure it? What are the big buckets of development opportunities that SEOs have as they're kind of like stepping into the enterprise arena? And if there's anything maybe in like the course structure, but also kind of like the big areas that, like, if I was, to be having this inspiration to be an SEO at an enterprise organization, like, how should I prepare myself for that?
Yeah. So I would say the way how the course structure developed is probably a good guidance on like what you should focus on to start with. It starts with like how you can navigate complexity using your empathy, and that's really around those politics and people challenges and navigating things like conflict and building influence, and that's, I would say, is 100% a key step. You need to build on those skills in order to excel in enterprise SEO. There is just no way around it. Then the second part of it is really talking about mostly technical SEO, but also it actually goes through the full search journey. I just think technical SEO is such a unique beast for enterprise SEOs that it kind of had its own topic. And So that second part is going through the full search journey and that complexity, and really not going into detail. So you're not going to learn technical SEO or local SEO or content from that course, but if you kind of already used other resources to learn it, you will understand how you actually change your mindset on applying those learnings into enterprise contexts. And I think that's really the crucial missing piece a lot of the time. And the third element is really around strategy and future proofing your solutions. So like really having processes. And here as well, and I worked with the really great Robert Laura from Secret Digital on some of the resources, and Jojo from helped a lot from Sitebulb on actually pulling together a lot of these resources as well for the course. So big shout out to them for all their support. We have a maturity analysis. So I had like a template of maturity analysis, and Robert Laura has created like GPTs and different AI tools that you can use to actually assess that maturity. Because I think once you have the right mindset, then you have to get into practical action, right? And we've already mentioned this, like implementation and people being in meetings for many hours. You have to understand what the culture of the business is and what their existing strategies, their tool stack, how efficient they are. And that's really part of a maturity analysis, to actually go through those questions and pinpoint what's going to be the most difficult. Like some businesses are more efficient than others, and have like maybe already have a learning culture where you can just become part of that and share knowledge, because they have, I don't know, like get-togethers for the different teams to share lessons learned, and some won't have that. So you doing that, I think, is a great first step to develop your actual process and system on how you're going to work within the business, and how you're going to communicate changes that come up in the future as well.
Which you hit on one important piece. I mean, more than one important piece, but like I feel like the call out that maybe we missed earlier in the conversation is there is no one size fits all plan. And because you're dealing with the uniqueness of a corporate culture or structure or industry that they're in, is you're never going to be able to apply the exact same approach to SEO at the enterprise level in a different organization. And I think like leaning into the fact of like, hey, it doesn't matter what your experience was, you're going to have to do things differently if you're taking on a new role, is such a key piece that, I mean, in my mind, it helps, give you that perspective to then take the step backwards, like you mentioned earlier, to like really listen, understand these teams, see how you can be effective with them, versus trying to just implement past known strategies or, processes that you've used before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even enterprise SEOs can fall into that trap when they kind of move around businesses within the same vertical. And obviously that gives you a lot of confidence in understanding the vertical and the sector a little bit in terms of how search works. If there are, unique challenges in the SERPs or different featured snippets on like, or different algorithms that apply to you in different ways. But you still have to go in with those sort of go in with an open mindset of understanding how the culture is different, because the way how they implement things might work very differently for businesses even within the same sector, even if those two companies are competitors. So I call this sometimes the experience trap. Like I think as you become more seasoned as an SEO and have lots of successful projects behind you, it can be something where you see something and you say like, oh yeah, I've seen something similar before, so I think this would be the right solution. Of course, there are elements to that, and you should use that experience, but you should always stay curious and ask questions and dive a little bit deeper to really see what the context is here, because there will always be unique elements to the context.
100%. It's like the way I've described it is I can see an issue or an organization, and it's like I'm going to go into it with having a hypothesis of what either the issue is or the solution is. But as I explore further and further, I'm collecting clues that are either going to validate that I did see it the right way, but then I'm not going to hold on to that previous hypothesis if I get evidence that, hey, this will not work or it's not going to play out the way that I'm envisioning it. And I think you have to constantly keep that like open mind of like, am I getting any evidence that should counter what my previous hypothesis, strategy, whatever was?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, with that, we're going to transition to the lightning round, kind of like more shorter form kind of subject matters. So I'm going to throw at you 5 different questions. Each one will have its own kind of theme to it. And we'll just kind of go with it from there. So the first one is going to be buy or sell. And so are you buying or selling that emerging AI search should live within SEO teams or in a different place in the organization? So this is talking about, does AI search belong within existing SEO teams, or is it different enough that it should be its own unique team?
Yeah, so I hate this, but I'm going to be with saying it this, and probably all my answers with an it depends. I buy it if that team, that SEO team, the way how it sits within the organization already has authority as the experts in search 100%. So maybe I would just even shift the question. I do buy that the emerging AI search is a skill that belongs to SEOs, and we should absolutely be building on that because we are best positioned to be the experts. I am fully buying that. Whether or not structurally it sits within the SEO team, I think is a different question. I think there will be many other elements to the AI umbrella that will be within the organization. So it will depend on how that organization kind of has that function, and it could be that the AI search expert SEO is part of a different team, or that within SEO there are people who understand AI search better. But yeah, I would probably say that I buy SEOs having this skill set. They are the best positioned to have it. But the organizational level will again be very unique to how they are set up with wider aspects of AI.
Yeah, and it goes back to our previous point too of like, well, there is no one size fits all. There's going to be uniqueness to the organization. Similarly, sometimes SEO sits in the marketing side under the CMO, sometimes it's under product. There's not necessarily a best answer. I think I would say, like, if it is done apart, there should be people from the SEO team on that new team then. Otherwise, probably something was horribly done wrong previously around search, which is not a great starting point. But I think, of course, like there has to be that overlap between those teams. Next question is trend or trash? SEO governance frameworks, are they a trend or trash moving forward in search?
Yeah, so I'm gonna be terrible with these one word answers or really short answers because SEO governance on its own like makes a lot of sense that you should have we've been talking about processes and systems and all of that, so that's kind of what I would call SEO governance and having your framework. I absolutely think you have to have that to really make sure that the way how you're executing your strategy works. However, if SEO governance is suggesting that you're trying to force your process, your ideas onto other teams, then no. So you really need to think about this in a way where, can you build that SEO governance framework? Can you mold it so it fits within existing structures? Because it will pretty much never exist solely on its own, especially not at an enterprise level.
Fair points. And it is, it can be a double-edged sword. And I think, probably everyone interprets this question a little different. But I think like when you are putting something in place, like a governance like that by nature is a rigid structure, which then to your points is going to potential limit how quickly you can adapt and pivot. So I think like you do need to be very deliberate in how you might put something in place at the governance level, because that would be, or you'd hope it would be something that is going to be a tougher change down the line.
Yeah. Like testing, for example, right? Or like just go, no go decisions with your own tickets, for example, that you're putting in, like the thing that we talked about earlier with hreflang implementation or something. Like you want to have SEO governance there, that if they decide to add it to the sprint, there is governance around how it's going to be tested and who is going to sign off. And, it's going to be you or someone from your team who has to sign that off to make sure that that's there before it goes live. But that has to apply for these specific teams and processes within the wider framework and the wider governance of, like how they release code and all of that. So you need to decide where it has to be rigid and where it can be more flexible. I think with content, a lot of the time it can be more flexible, also because with hreflang, it can be implemented well or not well. Like it either, like a page is either, working, or it's 404 or a redirect. But with content, it's always a bit more nuanced. So that means the governance structure will be less rigid as well.
100%. And again, that nuance is such an important factor of actually being successful at this kind of level in this arena. Now, I like this next one. So this one's a crystal ball. So we're looking into the future. And the question is, how will the structure of enterprise SEO teams evolve in the next 18 months? I know this is also a very broad question in the sense of like, what's the organization and all of its other elements to it, but maybe more so like, are there emerging skill sets or an element that you'd want to be more mindful in the composition of your SEO team over this next 18 months?
Yeah, these questions are always just difficult because I think I want to say what I would like it to be versus what it might become.
Let's do both. Let's do both.
Yeah, so I would I think it kind of leads back to that first question. I would love SEO teams to really own that AI search piece as well, because it's so part of what we do already. So I hope that that's going to be the case, that a lot of these teams will naturally become the experts in explaining the algorithms behind, how users interact with these OpenAI tools or OpenAI or AI elements on SERPs and on different platforms, and who knows what other platforms will come in the coming months or year. So that's what I would really want. I think the reality is probably still that those who really focus on growing this skill and advocating within the business and finding sort of the right teams to, again, show those examples of like where you already have data and show your expertise, where you can help support them in understanding, how the brand is performing within AI search, for example. Like establish that authority for yourself and grow that out, and those who can do it will probably become really essential in the business, or they grow a skill set that's going to be very competitive going forward, so they will find good roles in enterprise and or different teams as well. The other part that I'm seeing is that, and I think we're kind of already seeing this trend, that SEO teams will shrink again. So I think we kind of went from the one-person SEO teams to a trend of growing in-house teams back to shrinking teams and outsourcing. And I think that's gonna remain a trend for those SEO teams who are kind of seen rigidly as just this traditional SEO per se, whether that's, I say that in quotation marks, because it's kind of like, what is traditional SEO? But I think it's important to show that adaptability, and then that's going to be crucial to how your career changes going forward, because it's either you have to become that authority in AI. There is no way around it.
Yeah, and for me, the adaptability piece is such a critical one, where I think that's always been an important characteristic of an SEO. Like, you have being curious, how quickly you can adapt, But I would say for myself personally, just in, whether recruiting for other clients or even recruiting for our team, that is something that I'm putting more emphasis and focus on, is just how comfortable someone can be in adapting to change, which is difficult in an interview to get to. But that is something that I think we have to be better at adapting quicker as SEOs, and we've always had to do it, but now the stakes are higher because the timeline that it takes us to do it is going to be the difference between an advantage or disadvantage in your strategy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so if you don't like short answers, this one's going to be really tough. This one is, what's the word? And so we're looking for one word to describe the current state of enterprise SEO.
So I'm gonna go with confusion. I was between uncertainty and confusion, but as you kind of pointed out earlier as well, uncertainty has kind of always been part of our job. But I think with the current rate of acceleration of how quickly and how much things change, there is a lot of confusion around the role of SEOs within businesses and people trying to figure out what to learn next, what information to consume, which I'm seeing kind of resulting in a lot of burnout or just sort of very challenging emotions in general. We always say, we hear the words SEO dead every year, multiple times a day. It's just one of those things that now things are changing so quickly and people are kind of jumping onto the trend of rebranding themselves as GEOs or whatever. And we know that at the end it's the same principle. If you've been doing SEO the way where you want to understand the algorithms, you want to provide good content, you want to have good websites, then nothing and you want to constantly learn and are curious, because that's always been part of an SEO's role, then essentially nothing changed for you from a mindset point of view. You just have to continue doing that, and you probably just have to be better at there is more information now, so you need to really try to use time to reflect on it and see what works for you. But I think there is a lot of confusion, and even if you're trying to find the answers, there are not a lot of answers don't exist yet for AI metrics. There is a new tool that tracks AI metrics every day, and all tools are adding it in, which is obviously great because we have to experiment, we have to understand what we see today, but we are not confident in these yet. So that's why I think we have to embrace that confusion, that the answers are not here yet. We're experimenting, and that's also a phase, and that's also, you can also be an expert in experimenting and not knowing and showing your confidence level in certain things.
Well, from that, if you're okay with it, I'm going to throw an audible at you, and I'm going to change the last question because I like where you went with that one. And so for the last question, I would say, what's the one piece of advice you would give a CEO knowing that the state of enterprise SEO right now is in this area of confusion? So what would the one piece of advice you would give to an executive to maybe help shepherd or create the environment that they can be successful in? So it's more of, we accept that we're in this state of confusion as an industry as a whole. And with that, the organizations oftentimes have uncertainty in how they should move forward. The executive team, they have to shepherd and they have to lead an organization through this state. What would be the advice then that they should take in guiding their organization?
Yeah. So I think with this one, a lot of it is actually probably agility, the experimenting, testing, listening and learning from that feedback on testing. So embracing that, things metrics might change in 2 months on specific AI metrics and things like that, but you still have to understand how they work. So maybe have some sort of framework for this, that how you're reporting on these new things, because they're not gonna be things that you can immediately action. And obviously executives love to see numbers where they can just make a decision on it. Are we going ahead with this or not? That's gonna be a lot more complex. So they have to adapt mindsets where it's a lot more experimental, and it's more, is this experiment still worth it for us to continue? Are we still learning good things from this? And should we pivot? Should we do something differently? And that's kind of the decision that you take rather than an actual business decision, at least at this stage.
Great advice. I love that piece. And I think too, it's like at the executive level, you shouldn't be caring as much on the specific task or initiatives. But if you're enforcing and creating the environment that leans into, like you said, being agile, being adaptable, being able to move quickly, you can create an advantage from this. And it also allows the team to be in a space where they can make mistakes, adapt quickly, learn from it, and kind of move on. And to me, that's one of the more exciting things in the industry right now, is you have an opportunity for smaller players to challenge the larger businesses if they can mobilize quickly and if they can pivot faster than a large organization or kind of some of the older players in a space. And so from the executive team, that is your responsibility in search, not whether or not we should prioritize internal linking or content on these pages. So I think like knowing where they can guide the team and the organization and have that positive contribution is also a really key element. All right, so that wraps up this episode of the Voice of Search podcast. Thanks again to Petra Kis-Herczegh from Chameleon Journal, providing her own freelance consulting, and also be sure to check out her recent enterprise SEO course, which is for free. You can find a link in the show notes, or also the partners Sitebulb, who she worked with on it. If you'd like to contact Petra, you can find a link to her LinkedIn profile in the show notes, or you can go on over to voiceofsearch.com, where we'll have all of her contact information. If you haven't subscribed yet and you want a daily stream of SEO and content marketing knowledge in your podcast feed, hit the subscribe button on your podcast app or on YouTube, and we'll be back in your feed soon. But with that, that's all for today. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you in the next episode.